Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Josh Campbell. I'm the CEO of Techonomy Media. Really glad you're able to join us today on this Friday before the weekend. Really excited for this conversation. Karen's someone we've known for a long time techonomist. Alfred, thanks to our friends over at 150 Bond, Dara, for a great introduction for this conversation around investing during these times. David, I'll send it over to you.
Thank you, Josh, and welcome to everybody, and welcome especially to Karen and Alfred. We're here to talk about how things are changing for venture capital and investing and the landscape of startups. And it is a historic moment, I think. So these kinds of conversations are extremely important, and it's historic for multiple reasons. I think we're all acutely aware of the bizarre uniqueness of the moment we are living through. First, we had the COVID crisis, which sent us all home and caused us to start working fundamentally differently if we had a job after that started. And then we had the murder of George Floyd by the police in Minneapolis and an extraordinary upsurge of protest and demand for change that is sweeping not just the United States, but even the world. And I think further changing the context for all of our societal operation, for everything that we will be doing as individuals and businesses going forward. And so what we're here to talk about is, what does that mean for investors? Both of our panelists are longtime thinkers about these matters, who are putting their money where their mouth is, or somebody's money. Karen Klein puts mostly Mike Bloomberg's money behind where her mouth is. She is the founding partner of Bloomberg Beta, which is an internal VC operation at Bloomberg that she's been part of since it was created in, what, 2013? Is that right?
Since 2013, and we're now on our third fund.
Okay, good. Oh, so we have you on two different connections here. Cool. Alfred Chuang is, and Karen, by the way, has invested in a wide range of companies, enterprise, consumer, particularly New York oriented. She's been based in New York. A lot of things have been different about Bloomberg Beta from the beginning. I think we'll hear about that. Alfred Chuang is a legendary entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, a co-founder of BEA Systems, which he built for years and sold it to Oracle for something around $8 billion in 2008, when he was still in his 40s, believe it or not. And now he is coming out of his period of quiet background activity. 12 years later, he has been an angel investor predominantly during that period. But he has tons of things that he learned when he was running that giant global company and building it and encountering all the challenges there, which give him insight into what's required. But also, he has some very strong views about the moment we're in. And Race Capital, the company that he's a general partner of, is a true VC firm, not just his money that he's raised from sovereign equity funds and others, in order to specifically invest differently in the wake of these crises. So I'm going to start with Karen, though, to hear you talk, Karen, a little bit about how you see the moment we're in and how you would compare it to the recent past. And you know, you were at SoftBank before you were at Bloomberg Beta as a VC, so you've been a VC for a long time. What's different now?
This is certainly a very trying time, and it highlights the need and perhaps potentially can serve as a catalyst for the real change that we need to see. I mean, the thing that's always been so frustrating to me is our country has been founded on the idea that all people are created equal. And, you know, centuries later, we still have a situation where there's an environment where people don't feel safe and they don't feel heard. And so I'm encouraged by the platform that we have to potentially put capital to work to support people of different backgrounds and to find opportunities that we might not normally see. And so some of this economic and climate of unrest, politically related to some of the racial protests and things that we've been seeing, I think put forward a real chance for us to do better.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting, the notion of feeling safe can be applied to both crises. For feeling safe from a health standpoint, and certainly a large number of Americans don't feel safe when they walk the streets. Alfred, so same question to you, but maybe you should talk a little bit about what has brought you out of hiding, so to speak, and how you see this moment and where you see the opportunity that's caused you to start an entirely new investment operation.
Actually, so for me, I've been waiting for this to happen. I didn't wish a pandemic upon us, but it was almost inevitable. There was going to be some kind of reset that was going to happen in the tech world. Obviously, our bubble was getting pretty big. There was just tremendous amount of capital was flowing into the systems. And I was starting to see entrepreneurs going to be focused from really growing a cash flow positive, successful business into just growth at all costs and just raising money. And I think this is I invested in a lot of companies post the 2000 .com bubble as an angel. And then I did again when BEA got sold in 2008, really at the bottom of that V in the financial crisis. And it's actually, what I found is actually some statistics will astonish you. So if you look at, I'll give you 3 examples of the 2008 crisis. So within 5 days of the bottom of that V in 2008, these 3 companies got started. One's Lyft, one is Credit Karma, which is in the process of being sold to Intuit for $7 billion, and then a company called Twilio, which is in the messaging space.
And you were involved in all 3 of those, if
no, I wasn't involved. I was involved in one of them.
You were involved in Lyft, right? Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. So these 3 companies, their pre-money valuation at the seed round, right at that V in 2008, was all under $3 million. So I just give you so obviously Credit Karma is being sold to Intuit for $7.1 billion, but as of this morning, Twilio's valuation in the marketplace is $28 billion. So there is something, obviously, when people plan for a whole new world, it creates an opportunity that a whole emergence of technology company appears. Technology is just a fascinating field. I thought I gone through the whole Unix era working for Sun, and then I thought it was interesting to see distributed transaction processing happen and move to e-commerce, and then the whole .com thing happened. Then it got very interesting that we have obviously the social network era that happened post the last financial crisis. The touch mobile technology really had happened. Then the whole apps phenomenon happened in the marketplace, and cloud technology. So we have so many things happen. You will say, well, maybe we're slowing down, but actually it's accelerating. So I'm pretty convinced what we're going to see in the next decade is going to be significantly much more interesting than what we see now, especially given what the crisis is bringing us. So I'll get into that a little bit.
Wow, that's an interesting observation if you think about the fact that we had the app economy, social media, and the cloud switch all happening since 2008, really. Facebook was infinitesimal in 2008. It was about, I think, 40 million users, roughly like that, and here we have 2.5 billion. Those are interesting that those 3 companies were founded at that time too. So, Karen, any thoughts and response to what Alfred said? And I know you too were involved in the market in 2008 and have seen lessons from those times.
Yes, so I agree with Alfred completely. I mean, it's unfortunate we have to go through these times, but what it does is it brings out the true founders who are passionate about what they're doing even more so, and it leads us to try and solve real problems. And so things in telehealth, distance learning, collaboration, a lot of the trends around, the workplace, we invest in the future of work, I think all are going to accelerate much more profoundly. And, an area we don't necessarily focus on, but I'm excited to see a lot of change in, is related to like public health and some of the conditions. Like if you look at some of the changes that came out of the 1918 pandemic, the hope is that we'll see even greater changes, especially in dense cities like New York, where, we invest quite actively, as well as San Francisco.
It's interesting too, looking at the poll data, Josh, maybe you can put that up. Telehealth is the #1 most mentioned thing. We just came up with our own list of the area where we will see more startups, although it's quite interesting. Josh and I came up with just a laundry list of things we thought might happen, and it seems like all of them are very likely to happen based on your collective opinion here. I also just think, as you were both talking, I was thinking, if we believe in capitalism, we have to believe that companies if we believe capitalism really serves society, which is a controversial notion and needs to be proven, I would say, especially now, we should desperately hope that the companies that are created now will not solve, but really concretely address the social problems that we face, even while they ideally generate returns for investors, because that's the way it's supposed to work. Alfred, any thoughts on that?
One of the things
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just quickly going to say, there's a need for real action. There's a lot of words that go forward about the interest in, racial equality and the desire to support diverse founders. And given we have capital to invest and we're actively, open to meeting founders of different backgrounds, I think we have a real platform or opportunity to change people's trajectories. And that is one of the ways I see real change coming forward, is, backing people who have different ideas that might not look like all of us. And so I'm hopeful that some of the, protesting will, and all the great words that people are sharing, publicly, will translate into, real action and commitment to back founders of all backgrounds.
Thanks, Karen. Actually, a good question just came up from Micah, which maybe Alfred could tackle, because you and I discussed this on the phone. I don't know if you can see it. I'll read it. Aren't telehealth and distance learning pretty well funded already? That's a question in itself. But he also says, what about sectors like infrastructure and energy, where you can more closely link social justice, environmental justice, and economic opportunity? I think that's a very good question. Alfred, take a swipe at that.
Yeah. So I certainly have a slightly unique view, because I wasn't born here. I came to this country when I was in high school, and after the first time that I went into the consulate and they denied my student visa to come to the country, and I still wanted to be here. Right? Oh yeah, I still wanted to be here because of all the things that our country represents. So I came here, I went to college, and I went to graduate school, and I went to work for a great startup that was Sun back in the 80s. And all the things that, I agree when I signed on to these papers as a student that I never would do, that like staying here afterwards and all that kind of stuff. But I'm here because I wanted to. I became a US citizen because I wanted to. So, and that is always in the back of my mind of what we represent as a country to do that. There's no doubt, by the way, not just I think between the energy field and other fields that we can contribute so much more to resolve the social injustice problem, and clearly it exists. And you look at the last time we had a curfew was in 1943 in New York. So our country didn't progress enough, I think, from this perspective. Something has to be done. And sometimes it would take, which is our First Amendment right, to go tell the world we're not happy with this, which is the greatness of this country. But I think going back in to talk about tech has a responsibility. So because we change things so much. I think at times we don't notice that we actually created a digital divide. So look at what's going to happen very quickly, right, in our world. Tomorrow, our biggest universities and the most successful high school will be a software company. A grocery store will be a software company and a robotics company. Our biggest entertainment company will be a software company. Our biggest hospital will be a software and robotics company. Our biggest energy company will be a software company. Listen to Elon. And working from home and being decentralized will be all our new normal. So now here's the question, right? If you're underprivileged, you have no bandwidth to access any network. You can't afford a computer for each one of your kids, right? And you really don't have an environment you can possibly work at home. So this is going to create even a bigger wedge into the system. Now, as a venture capitalist, we can obviously control what people do and how they create companies, but certainly we have to have our values nailed down and say, what are these companies going to do? Do they align with us and how they think they're not going to further perpetuate the digital divide? How are they going to help for inclusion, to allow more people in? Because that's the whole goal, right? More people become successful, our field become more successful. It has to be that way.
Yeah, that's a really great way to think of it. And let's face it, here, nothing personal, but Karen had to make 2 connections here to get a fair connection into Zoom. Our infrastructure is still not what it needs to be. We need better wireless, we need better broadband, we need better fiber connectivity to far more of America. That's, I think, something we would all agree is a key, indispensable, platform level part of equality and inclusiveness that is not sufficiently developed now. And I would assume that both of you see that as one of the concrete opportunities, which actually can be a response both to the COVID crisis, where we're working more remotely, and the inclusion and diversity crisis, where everyone needs to be wired in.
Well, David, I think one thing is very clear to me. We're never going to go back to the world we came from 11 weeks ago. That's done. The question is, what does a new world look like? And what do we have to do to prepare for this new world? And our new world is going to be, none of the tools that we're using, including Zoom, was specifically developed that we could be all doing everything remotely. Thank goodness, it is scaled from 10 million users to 300 million users. So it's a makeshift tool, seriously, right? Well, just for us to survive. But we never have developed enough of software for collaboration, for interaction, for social activities, for our mental health that we are now sticking on the computer all day long. All the aspects of things, how we will deal into the future. So this is going to need some serious rebuilding and rethinking. What's the platform for work? What's the platform for education? What's really the platform for telehealth? But those are not there.
So when our respondents to the poll, overwhelmingly 88% say they see a chance for significantly different kinds of companies to be formed in the wake of COVID-19. Are those the kinds of companies you would think of? And Karen, I'd love you to chime in on that also.
Yeah, I also think there's a significantly different opportunity for leadership. And so one of the things I think we've seen emerge over the last 10 years has, and more recently, as we've navigated through these different types of, challenges on our plate, is a much more nimble and adaptive type of leader. And that's really being put into question, right now, as we're working remotely, we're trying to keep our teams together, and feeling safe and also motivated and able to carry on with their own family well-being, as well as the office types of responsibilities that they have. So one of the things I'm most excited for is there might be even a change in what we view as a leader. So instead of the person who can charismatically stand up and do an all hands in front of 100 people, we now see an opportunity for somebody that has much more EQ and much more ability to operate under uncertainty and make decisive actions. And so that could very well be somebody who doesn't look like the classic perception of what a founder looks like.
Well, I don't know if you know, there's actually a very interesting statistics. In January, there were 219 departures of the largest CEOs in our country. And then in Q1, we have over 400 CEOs basically retired, left the job. So we have seen the biggest departure. I think in some way, we needed a reboot also in our leadership in every aspect, not just the biggest company, in tech also. We don't need people to go blindly chase growth anymore. We really need people to really create a company that are responsible. They can create a legacy, and they be able to better mankind. I think that really is, we see that too. That would align with our value. Yeah.
Let's quickly stick with that for a minute, because I know both of you have pretty strong views about the nature of the kind of ethos and leadership psychology of Silicon Valley that has prevailed in much of the recent time, and I don't think either one of you are terribly happy with it. Alfred, just to continue, I know it's one of the things that you, in fact, when your team sent me the list of things that you were most concerned about in starting your new company, Silicon Valley hubris and the shift from that was the #1 thing that they mentioned. So has that changed, and how bad of a problem has it been?
Well, thank God it's changed. I think people actually sometimes get confused about what I actually is preaching. I think having a hybrid, remote and local model of creating companies have been very problematic. But now, when we all force to be fully decentralizing our companies, it creates a huge opportunity. I'll give you an example. I saw two very, very smart entrepreneurs that was just barely coming out of incubation. They were doing a data technology. Was extremely interested. So I had a follow up, like literally 8 days later with them. And I asked them, I said, well, what changed? They said, well, we moved back to Toronto. I said, why? They said, well, if I don't tell you, you won't notice, because it doesn't make any difference anymore, right? Because now everyone is decentralized. On top of it, I said, well, the exchange rate is 1 to 1.4. So I can just put my cash to work and also be able to leverage a set of talents that I wouldn't be able to before. I don't have to go fight for that madness in San Francisco. So I think that is making huge difference in terms of breaking down that physical barrier that has to be within 50 miles of San Francisco City. It's almost crazy. I mean, it sounded great, but in practice, it couldn't scale. So this actually creates an opportunity that we don't have to do that anymore.
Well, it's interesting that monoculture of Silicon Valley and its impacts, it's often been celebrated for the convenience and the ability to get engineers, et cetera. But, when we look at hubris and I can't help mentioning Mark Zuckerberg, who is under unbelievable fire this week for his unwillingness to do what everybody but him seems to think is the right thing, the moral thing, the just thing. And even it was amazing when Tom Friedman in a column day before yesterday called Mark Zuckerberg the Rupert Murdoch of his day and said all he cares about is money. That's Tom Friedman. That's the general public's view now. So there is still a residual hubris. But Karen, you've operated in New York all this time. You're a woman in venture capital, which is not common. How have you seen the environment up to now, and do you see a real chance for a shift?
So we've had an incredible run, right? For the past 10 years, there's been great growth related to the economy, related to tech startups, and the focus has been driven so much based on growth. And the thing that has been troubling to me is, and sometimes it's been growth at any cost. And so we've had investors who've only seen up cycles, and we've seen founders in some cases who've only experienced up cycles. And so this really is a pivotal moment for us, because it's going to be a great differentiator of who can really navigate through in a different type of environment. So yeah, I'm kind of optimistic. I continue to be optimistic. Hey, it's good that I have the job I do, and also that we've recently gotten our third fund so that we have capital to invest, because I'm excited about what's going to be ahead. The people who have the tenacity to persevere through this time are going to build really interesting things, and there's going to be so much less noise. I mean, like Alfred was saying, you're going to be able to hire and attract the best talent regardless of where they're situated. The one piece that I think needs to be solved for is related to the capital. And that's the question mark I see that I'm kind of going to watch actively. Seed, and pre-seed, which are the areas where we invest, I think geography won't necessarily be such a issue because I think people are making so many investments. There's a lot more liberty to take around being able to pop over and see the founder. At the later stages, the question is when somebody's only making, 3 to 5 or 6 investments a year, are they going to expect that person to be in their backyard? And so my hope is that the tools like Zoom and the things that we're working with currently will be enough that people can develop real relationships and investors will feel that level of trust with founders. But that's the one piece that I wonder about in our equation that might hold us back a little bit. And I do have an alternative to that, which goes back to what we were saying about growth at any cost. I mean, I think there could be a movement toward creating much more sustainable businesses that don't grow at the hockey stick that we expect, that instead take a lot longer to get to the place that they need to. But guess what? Along the way, they're creating great jobs. They have a healthy environment for their employees. They think about the benefits that their employees need. And so I see a path. I just hope that we're positioned and optimistic and open-minded in the right way to be able to take it.
Yeah, I think we should talk a little bit about the specific kinds of companies you're both investing in and what you've done lately. And I know, Karen, you said that early stage hasn't even slowed down. So talk about what you have done in the last couple months and what you expect to do going forward. And then Alfred perhaps can follow similarly.
Yeah, it hasn't slowed down. I wish in a way it would slow down a little bit, just so and part, I think some of that is because people had a pretty healthy pipeline of opportunities that they had already committed to. And, the good news on this go around is it seems like a lot of the investors, kept to their words if they made commitments to founders. I haven't heard of many broken term sheets like was the case in the era of 2000, 2001, and 2008. But we are always really excited about the future of work. We just think we spend so much time doing it that we wanted to provide the right tools to help us do our jobs and, to be happy at work. And so the things that we've been investing in are very consistent with the things of the first fund back in 2013, which is we like businesses that use AI to solve real problems. We also are, like Alfred was saying earlier, very interested in just boring old industry type businesses that get reformed or transformed through software. And then, finally, it's around remote work and the tools to help us, like I said, do our jobs more productively have all been areas of focus for us. And I'd say over the past couple of years, one of the things I've thought about for there to be a more diverse workplace is that we need to find solutions for childcare and elder care. And so that continues to be a theme, an area where we've been looking for opportunities. And then the other thing that we've been doing since we started, and continues to resonate has been security. Unfortunately, with us all being online, that's opened and using a whole range of different tools, I think that's created a lot of opportunity for the black hats. And so we're trying to make sure that systems are secure for people to be able to do their work.
Well, that's important. And go ahead, Alfred. I know you have a very big picture, well-articulated vision of where the whole digital ecosystem is going.
So David, actually, I've seen along with my partners over 120 companies in the last 11 weeks. So the way that we run the fund is more like running a software company, mostly because that's really the only thing I know how to do. So we have we set a long-term vision for 10 years of what the world looks like. Obviously, that's subject to continued evolvement and adjustment. And then we know that software, especially in enterprise tech, it takes about 4 to 5 years to mature a piece of software before it can go onto that tear of exponential growth. So that means if we don't invest in the first 12 to 24 months into the cycle of this major change over the next decade, we're going to miss these deals. So the specific areas that we're very interested in are, they're all in infrastructure, but it's enablement software for all these changes that we talk about in education and telecommunication, obviously in collaboration. I'll give you a specific example. So one area that we were particularly interested in is how do we solve the problem of, resolving people just getting the rat holes all day. You get on Slack, engineers are specialists in getting a rat hole. So they started Slack sessions and they go on and on and on, and they got nowhere. And typically in physical work environment, you tap somebody on the shoulder, you have 2 to 3 minutes of a discussion, that ends, and you move on, you decide. So we lack that. So we literally are looking for infrastructure technology to enable a very, very short video calls to specifically solve these kind of problems. So, and these kinks, if you get out of it, eventually that whole platform of the new way of interaction will change. Hopefully that will even help, socialization, gaining trust, all the things that we also need as invested into the entrepreneurs themselves. But our interests are in privacy and security. Privacy, VPN is going to need a whole new generation of VPN. Just now, we can no longer rely on physical security to just lock up our stuff because we don't want to leave the office. Employees are taking everything with them. So we need to safeguard where and how information get disseminated. The technology specifically to be able to help on transaction on data. We have really a lot of interest in data. Data is the new oil. And we barely are scraping the surface of what real-time data can change the world into having very accurate information. And also in fintech, because what we used to think of a bank in consumer banking, in commercial banking, has all changed. Now, most of that instrumentation is not somebody walking into the bank. It's through an application. I started in Grubhub. So the first thing I do is open a bank account to put all of my 1099 income into that account, do all the pre-tax savings, all of that, and be able to manage my finance separately. And for this gig economy and the continue bigger gig economy, that's going to be things that, it's going to be super crucial for us. So we are clearly super interested in that push infrastructure-wise of that new world.
Interesting. And just want to note, you two have a different view. Karen's saying some companies may be good companies and grow more slowly, but you, Alfred, are still talking about the hockey stick. And you really believe there's the opportunity for these vast increases as, investors in BEA experienced, I might mention. I want to just quickly, before we go to some audience questions, go through these poll results, just make sure we don't miss them. So we did see a very strong view that there's going to be more kinds of companies formed because of COVID. I mentioned that before. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, do we expect more diversity and inclusion in tech and startups? A small amount of change is what the largest number of you expect. A disturbingly large percentage, and I'm not going to say you're wrong, expect lots of rhetoric and little action, or 2%, nothing to change, but that's still 29% not expecting much. However, I thought this was really stunning because this has been a huge problem with tech investment. Minority entrepreneurs getting funded after this crisis will be much, much greater in the opinion of the people on this Zoom, which is interesting. And now then the stakeholder approach, which we've heard so much rhetoric about, especially from big companies, might get a little better, but we're still pretty skeptical on that. We've talked about the industries, but the investment environment is great for startups. Okay, I just wanted to go through that. But now, Josh, why don't you introduce a couple of our questioners?
Sure, thanks, David.
Real quick, can I just add something though? The last point, it's
Please.
saying that it's better for investors. I actually think it's going to be better. There's still a fair bit of money out there. So I think it's going to be better for the founders that want to continue to build their companies, because depending on what type of industry they're in, they might have better access to talent, like we talked about, less friction around getting customer attention, and whether they're in the consumer space where they have to spend on advertising, there's going to be much less noise. But even on enterprise sales, going back to it, or these new channels that have emerged, it's just going to be a lot. There's less friction. I think the only challenging question will be getting money, and not only, because look, starting companies are hard, so I don't want to in any way undercalibrate it, but I just would push back on the poll findings a little bit and encourage.
I might have even misread them. I'm not sure.
To continue on, and if you're starting a good company, yeah, well, come see Alfred and me.
Yes, yes.
I'm sure there's people on this Zoom that would be interested to hear that. Okay,
Great.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have a ton of questions. The first one, actually was asked about, obviously Facebook bought Oculus. People hypothesize that, hey, would social move the way of VR? We see things like holographic, technologies happening, different 3D technologies. Do you guys see an opportunity in collaboration tools to move towards a more sort of going away from 2D video like Zoom and audio into 3D, VR, those types of experiences?
Well, one of our partners in our firm really is the pioneer of the Vive from HTC. So he has huge passion around this stuff. So, I think we haven't exploited really the potential commercial and also just really the application of VR yet. Like, we should be able to do a lot of those dangerous things that we normally rely on human to fly into an oil field and to be able to do, specialists are going to do repair. We can do it from afar. A great surgeon who normally only can operate on 2 patients now be able to operate on 40 because they can leverage using VR and also augmented reality technology. So there's so much of that stuff that could be done to bring that experience in. You look at what happened to all these virtual car races. A lot of that they use as the virtual reality to get that sensation, also to now show the audience, how close of a race that really is. And the amount of people that turn in to watch it is astonishing. So it changes entertainment, it changes sport. So I think we haven't really exploited that, but now because geographically we're now forced to be able to stay at home, a lot of the sport's gonna play without any spectators at all. So how is the spectator going to be able to feel the environment around them? So I think those developments are going to come very, very quickly.
Right. And I think to your point, we were looking at drone racing league and some things like that. It's not just the one way, it's that round trip, right? You need, as a surgeon, that feedback also loop. So the networks, the latency, there's a lot of pieces that will have to sort of improve first.
So I want to add one thing. So David, I know you're passionate about social network and Facebook and all.
Well, I'm worried about it, but go on.
You're worried about it. So I'm worried too, right? But remember, social networking company, the entire system is really based on the quality of the connections between the people. It was never, they never worry about the quality of the information, which is now all of a sudden, when you have all that connections that everybody can share so quickly, that truth of the information becomes so crucial now. Good point. Who is responsible for that truth? It's unfortunate. I think the social networking company would now have to be put in the place that they have to care about the truth of those information. How could they not, right? Otherwise, you're spreading a lot of untruth in that sense. But just think about it. So if we move this into the world of virtual reality and augmented reality, and bad behavior gets spread like that really is not supposed to be spread, my God, we can only imagine this catastrophic results, if that's the case. So
well, in reality, in reality, Facebook is moving toward encryption of all of its messaging infrastructure, which will simply hide the nature of the information being shared, rather than increase their responsibility for it. So they're going in the opposite direction, but they're not getting a lot of applause for that. I think we could agree. Karen, did you have something to say?
No, I agree with you, and the thing that's interesting is that more people are speaking out about it. So maybe that, and hopefully that will lead to change. But yeah.
Great. Well, let's
I'd
go.
also say though, Josh, one second. What you said, Alfred, about the social media was all about the quality of the connection, not the quality of the information being exchanged and the volume. That is such an interesting way to put it. And Facebook has never seen it that way at all. By the way, the most interesting thing that's happened recently about Facebook, in my opinion, was the letter that the 30 or 40 early Facebook employees published day before yesterday, in which they pointed out that Facebook started as an empowerment tool for individuals, but by now allowing the top people, the politicians, to lie, but not allowing the ordinary people to lie, they are flipping the empowerment thing so that they're only empowering the top rather than the bottom, which was, I thought, a brilliant formulation. Anyway, Josh.
All right, let's go over to Art from Ultra Nuts and Elephant Ventures. Art, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hello, Art.
Hey, gang. How are you? Hi. So yeah, I'm Art Scheckman. I founded a company. It's a social impact about 7 years ago called Ultranauts. We employ people as software testers and data quality engineers. And we also happen to be a social impact because 75% of our staff are folks that are on the autism spectrum. And we're a for-profit company growing 30+% a year, like a pretty healthy growth curve, but we don't have a hockey stick. And we just raised a round of institutional money basically the last summer. And it took us about 9 months to raise. And we met a lot of folks who had the same feeling. Hey, CEOs need to do a different job, right? They need to be more mindful. They need to be more socially responsible. They need to build companies that grow a little bit slower, but more consciously. And everybody was on board with that. But then when we actually talked to the folks about returns and future projections and term sheets and multiple, they're like, where's my 10X? Where's my 7X? I need to be out in 5 years. And so it's sort of, there's a dichotomy in the minds of the VC community of like, hey, this is a thing we should do. This is where we should be going. But the LP and GP structures they're in don't allow them to actually have realistic conversations about the return that comes with like factoring in or accounting for impact. Like our models, for every dollar of sales we generate, it generates $2 of governmental savings in social impact by removing people from social assistance and actually like downstream tax revenue, all kinds of things. But there's no line item in their Excel and like the deal vetting term sheet. And so I would put the challenge back to you, and I'd love to hear both of your opinions about like, where does that shift come from in the VC and investor community, and how do you frame that or think about it?
Very meaty, Art. Thank you, and typically for you. Go ahead. And that was great.
So Art, first of all, I want to thank you for creating a business that is so inclusive, especially for 75% of the people that have autism. Actually, one of my co-founders at BEA, his son had autism, so I kind of saw him witness how he grew up and the challenge he went through and how eventually he had now lived just a wonderful life. I talked to him recently. He's living in Japan. And I think there is a fundamental issue with the financial market in total for technology company. Because I've been around for a while. See, in the old days, the world didn't operate like this. In the old days, we really have an infinitely scalable funding model, which is company get seed A, B, C, D. From venture, you can get mezzanine round, and the company go public, right? And they don't have to be big because we used to have hedge funds that are much smaller that they could afford to invest in a very small amount in an IPO and stay with those companies. Like my own investor put $50 million in, but they didn't sell at IPO. They hung in there and they let the company pivot 2 more times. When it reaches its peak at $55 billion in market cap, then they distribute. So that really put long-term investment in perspective and how well it works. And I think this whole post-2000, the whole IPO market, because the hedge funds are now so big, they just don't have the resources to go invest into the small IPOs, has been really is a huge issue for a company to raise funding, because companies should not be like this. Well, the company I created, it didn't have spectacular growth. It had the 30, 40% growth like yours for the longest time. It's only when opportunity came that we actually were able to pivot into the e-commerce field. then we had that hockey stick. And then it went back into normal growth again, and it became a very large company that $2 billion a year in revenue. So if we don't bring that back in place, we're going to have continued weird behaviors, and people act badly, and people will take, like opportunities and do bad things. So I think normalizing that whole formula is going to be crucial for us in the future. It's almost like 20 years now since the dot-com bubble. We're really ready for some change overall in long-term view of companies to allow them to go through these peaks and valleys, but yet create big things. I mean, like, it's almost impossible to create a Google or an Amazon in today's world, because Amazon didn't grow like this in the beginning, right? So how did they get here? Because they had that time, and they had investors willing to hang in there.
Really interesting. Karen.
And they still have investors, I mean, that are willing, like tech has a greater flexibility. And one of the things I see is that it's much more systemic, because if you think of public companies, they're so tied to quarterly reporting and quarterly earnings. And there isn't that patient shareholder with the rise of electronic trading and these big funds, there really isn't that kind of patient capital. So it trickles back. And it's interesting that the public companies look to the startups as having so much more flexibility about able to take a long-term vision and long-term growth. So I think it almost has to start with people voting with their dollars and investing in companies that at the public level that are growing at more reasonable paces, and not trading in and out of those companies, but holding on to them for a long time. And then that filtering back through to the, venture and startup ecosystem as well.
Right.
Josh, can you let Art just respond?
I want to go to Esther, because I know we have to wrap, we only have a couple minutes.
Okay, maybe we'll get back to Art if we can, but go ahead. Yeah. We might have to do it by email.
We have another question from someone in our community, Esther Dyson. Esther, you should be able to unmute.
I'm here. Yeah. First,
hi, Esther.
Thank you, everybody. It's so great to hear you talking about all this stuff in the right context. And rather than repeat what you said, which I totally agree with, I'm just curious. Nice to see you guys. How do you see this changing investing in companies outside the US? What's the impact going to be there?
Great question.
Well, Esther, very good to hear your voice. I'm
going to send you some deals.
Yeah. Well, I have to first admit that I think our foreign policy in this country has made things much more difficult than it's ever been. So our current stance with China is clearly not helping things, right? So for us to be able to invest into deals in China is going to be much more difficult than it's ever been. And
especially if there's no airplanes going back and forth.
Well, I think not just, well, that's a big problem too. I mean, like, airplanes aside, it's just that people just never know about how free and how concerning about information that we are moving back and forth. And then also money moving back and forth is now becoming much heightened than it's ever been, because of a lot of it has to do with our foreign policy. So the free world that we really have enjoyed over 2 decades is rapidly changing. So from that perspective, it's very sad. I mean, like, I've seen some incredible companies from all over the world, especially during the pandemic, because I honestly don't know what time they are if they don't tell me and what room they're in. And so the world should be that way, right? It's about globalization, but I think we actually gone backwards from that perspective.
Wow.
I agree. One of the things that's been a little bit of a ray of hope has been some of the companies in the US are looking for teams in different geographies. And, from that, there's more development. I mean, our neighbors, I mean, we've been pretty active in investing in Canada, and I think that will continue. So there's internationally, it's definitionally, and it does unfortunately have some dependency on the political climate and governance.
And it is ironic, we talk about inclusion in the United States, and that's properly a top priority right now. But in reality, there's still 3 billion or so people left out of the world economy. And if we don't find a way to include them through entrepreneurship and other means, our situation will be even more threatened than it is by rioting in the streets today, in my opinion, long term. We cannot continue sustaining a world that leaves a large number of people out of the world economy.
So David, actually, I also have a side gig that along with one of my venture partner and some folks, we actually have a nonprofit in Hong Kong. So that's where I came from. And we know that there's been a lot of noise and unrest there, for the past many, many months. One of the things that, back in December, I went to see the local investors, the dean of the universities, talk to the students, and talk to the people in the government. It's clear to me that entrepreneurship is not as widely available, even in a top-notch economy in the world, especially for tech, as you will think is like here, because culturally it's just not there. So that's something that we have worked very hard. I do totally expect that Raise will invest in the companies in that region just for that reasons, because you see such incredible talent, but they may be restricted in go-to-market, or they may be restricted in how they expand their team. We want to be helpful and make that happen.
Interesting. Josh, take the lead here, because I'm not sure if we have time for anything.
I think
There's a bunch of other
there was one other question, just, based on the poll questions around the telehealth, well, obviously there'll be huge opportunity. There was a question about regulation and the role of how regulation will change, especially in healthcare coming out of the crisis. Do you guys see that will impact sort of healthcare system and create new opportunities or sort of thwart existing opportunities?
Oh, go ahead, Karen, please.
I was going to say, government always has the power to work both ways. I mean, in light of the crisis, they did loosen some requirements, and it's fueled some of the growth around telehealth. Look, we're hopeful that once you see the power and the benefits of those change, it will continue. But so much of this, is depending on who we put into leadership, and so we have to be very actively cognizant of understanding our choices and making sure everyone goes out to vote.
Yeah,
I actually think this may be our chance. I think in health, we do see now we were able to break some of those historical HIPAA rules that people were able to do stuff like uploading their pictures to their doctors, and rapidly healthcare systems are now having telehealth apps that they put up. Like these are all happened in the last 12 weeks. And I've been astonished how fast people were able to move. And also the technological enablement is so now reachable that people could do this kind of stuff on the fly. The cloud and also these no-code technology allow people to do this kind of stuff. It's encouraging. That part is extremely encouraging.
Well, I'm glad to end on an encouraging note. I think there's actually been a lot of positive things that have come up in this discussion, which was very deep and meaningful, I think, and meaty. So thank you to both of you for taking time, for joining us. Thank you to the audience for joining us. Thank you to Bloomberg Beta for partnering around the creation of this event.
Really appreciate everyone joining us. Hopefully when you registered for this event, you signed up for our newsletter, you'll get updates with all of our content. And really, again, appreciate you guys being part of the community. Thanks again, Alfred and Karen.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
David.
You always do such great conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Alfred.